Acquired conscience. The work teaches that we have acquired conscience, which is different in all peoples, cultures, and nations. However, we all have real conscience too, but it's buried. The question then becomes whether acquired conscience is based upon self-love, and do we feel that real conscience is not? Speaking about acquired conscience, everyone has a different acquired conscience in accordance with their upbringing. Suppose you were brought up to think that a person who wears brown boots and a top hat is beyond the pale, then you will have acquired conscience in judging them. That people with tattoos are somehow criminals and tramps or harlots. You would label this conscience. Then if you yourself wore brown boots with a top hat, you would be deeply pricked by your acquired conscience. And meeting such a person, you would tend to have nothing to do with them. Glancing at different forms of acquired conscience that exist today and always have, acquired conscience makes us divide things into right and wrong, according to our nature. We say that brown boots with top hats are impossible, yet looking deeper into this example, say we encounter someone who is very interesting, and after being with them a long time suddenly notice that they have a top hat and brown boots. Instantly our buffers will come into effect, and instead of taking that person as themselves, we will take them as an example of bad taste. Tradition and social norm plays a very large part in this question. Same-sex relationships are an evolving example of this. Tradition forms an acquired conscience in us, and is stronger than individual contact with a person. Tradition makes you, not yourself, because we have traditional eyes in us that are acquired, which makes it difficult to become a real person. A real individual, free to communicate with everyone. And so it narrows down our relationship to people. We may privately think political agreement is a good thing, but our traditional eyes will prevent us from accepting it. We see many examples of this, which means that our acquired conscience, traditional in this sense, prevents us from behaving intelligently as an individual. We are then collective, and not individual in our judgment of things. We are actually sacrificing our individual judgment to traditional conscience. This is not real conscience, it's acquired conscience, because we stand on our honor, our tradition, our customs, patriotism, religious beliefs and so on, but all this is acquired conscience, something that we have been brought up to believe in. Such a person is not capable of direct individual thinking with regard to an actual situation. They will not give up their acquired conscience, which is varied in different nations, regions and even cities. Whereas the work teaches that real conscience is the same in everyone, not various, and that through it agreement is possible everywhere. We can select and will use many examples of the action of acquired conscience now and in the future, such that we cannot understand how people can be so silly as to behave as they do. Then notice how this acquired conscience prevents any further development of the human race. To make contact with real conscience, one has to become more conscious of their own mechanical reactions, and you can take this idea down to its final issues with regard to our social life and networking. Yet behind all that infinite confusion, acquired through tradition, upbringing, education and so on, there lies real conscience, through which all people can come into relationship with one another. Once their acquired conscience is observed and then worked against through a process of giving up its purely mechanical reactions to others. Acquired conscience is always connected with self-love, which continually puffs itself up into all forms of vanity, all forms of making difficulties, of duty and pride, based upon prestige, tradition, honor, nationality, ideology and so on. In this way, self-love incites continual antagonism, conflict, oppression, and violence. That is why the work places such emphasis on false personality, on invented things, on false behavior, carried out in the name of so much that is utterly meaningless. As a Scotsman, I meet a man who belongs historically to a clan that has always been at war with my clan. I get on with this man very well in conversation, think him intelligent and like him, until I find out that he is one of this accursed clan, that by tradition and honor I must despise. So I rise from the table, throw my drink in his face, then go and fight a duel with him. This means that I sacrifice my individual understanding to my acquired traditional conscience, which of course is sin in the deepest sense of the word, missing the mark. Instead of seeing the person individually and understanding them, I suddenly become blind, violent, and sacrifice myself to the eyes that belong to acquired traditional conscience. In other words, I lose all possibility of individual development through my own intelligence and understanding. Recently, while reading novels written during the 19th century, I came across the idea that a person who knits is quite to be looked down upon, whereas a woman who embroiders is all right. Notice here that this will make an acquired conscience in a person brought up in those times, and that such a person may meet a woman whom they may like very much, then suddenly discover that she knits, and so will have nothing further to do with her. Is this acquired conscience or real conscience? One person says, "An Englishman's word is his bond," hypnotizing people into feeling that all English can be trusted. If an Englishman were accused of breaking his promise, he might say, "Don't you know that I'm English?" All I can say is that it may be so, but brought up to this idea, an individual will not be able to get in touch with their real conscience. Nor will they be able to see how often they do not fulfill that picture of themselves in the conduct of their domestic life, their marriage vows, their work ethic, and so on. In this regard, the following example has a certain kind of acquired conscience, developed by surrounding influences, exemplified by the idea of a sporting conscience, which is certainly an acquired conscience. A sportsman's conscience would not allow them to cheat at games, but in business affairs they would have no such scruples. Here we have an example of how acquired conscience is based upon self-love, how when self-love is targeted, we feel miserable. Our idea of what we should or should not do comes solely from what we want thought about us. We take selfies, posting them on social media, then are most offended if other people do not believe in them. We think it awful to be late because we don't want to be that sort of person, from a perspective of vanity, not from external considering at all. We say that we are conscience-stricken if we have been lazy, selfish, uncharitable, or lost our tempers in public. Acquired conscience does not seem to mind, however, if these things are done in private. Acquired conscience always justifies if anything goes wrong, and we are found lacking in our own estimation, because we can't bear our self-love to be hurt. This illustrates how our acquired conscience is connected with self-love, and is not real conscience, which has scarcely anything to do with self-love. We feel that we have made fools of ourselves socially, and so have depleted our self-love. However, we have to know what it is to feel that we have been fools and made mistakes without always trying to justify ourselves, and get back to where we were before, socially speaking. This acquired conscience can be associated with the scribes and Pharisees that Christ so constantly attacked. The reason being that acquired conscience is only turned outward, only distressed when one has made a fool of themselves externally, in the opinion of other people of their own social rank. Real conscience is turned inward on the other hand, and has scarcely anything to do with this outwardly turned conscience. As long as our lie has come off and is well applauded, it will not bother our external conscience, but internal conscience will know that we have lied, possibly even harmed a great many people, however well we might have carried it off. The awakening of real conscience undermines personality little by little, attacking firstly, or making false personality uneasy. All those pretenses, facades, sassiness, and external appearances that we spend so much force on maintaining, until the work begins to dissolve us. One follower asked if fashion was an example of acquired conscience. The answer is to ask oneself if we can follow fashion without being controlled by the trend. If you only feel valued or recognized by obeying fashion, then you have no center of gravity, save self-love, and are turned around by fashion, instead of fashion turning around you. The difference lies between what fashion does to you and what you do in response to the latest trends or challenges. This seems an important idea and carries through to many facets of our lives, such as politics or religion. Several people connected acquire conscience and self-love with internal considering. We can observe acquired conscience in connection with internal considering in, for example, wanting to do the right thing, and as internal considering means looking after oneself, this must be connected with self-love. Acquired conscience can also be based on fear of consequences, fear of loss of prestige, possessions or position, fear of social ostracism, fear of criticism or of ridicule, fear of not being thought well of. This particular fear seems to be based on self-love. A quiet conscience is based upon self-love, and self-love is based on fear. Self-love is oriented outwards towards and reflected back. It's what we perceive as people's endorsement of us. If they flatter, then our self-love is gratified, and if not, then we feel rejected and depressed. We are afraid of having our self-love wounded, having no basis of truth in ourselves. A countryman on the road was wearing a peculiar cap with ear-pads in the frozen weather. His wife shouted out to him, "People will think you are a fool wearing a cap like that," and he replied, "I think they are fools for not wearing caps like mine." He did not follow fashion but made a personal statement. All self-love is based on fear of other people's opinion about you. Self-love can never be abolished completely in us, as Christ illustrated with the words, "You must love your neighbor as yourself." In other words, there must be self-love and love of our neighbor, but in equal measure. We cannot help being wounded through self-love or gratified by something we have done well through self-love. Ouspensky would say that if we have done something well, we can give to our self-love just one tiny moment of satisfaction and no more. But a person who is full of self-love and nothing else is always afraid, and naturally so if you come to think of the reason. Because their center of gravity is outside themselves, paradoxically, because they wish to gain applause and praise, to gratify themselves, yet they have nothing internal that they follow, apart from the attitude of other people towards them. Certainly an individual cannot develop purely from self-love, but only from a well-harnessed self-love, which is more free from vanity, which may however retain some pride. You know how often people do things from self-love and call it individuality. For instance, they insist that they are in love with someone and carry the thing through from self-love. However, immediately they have attained their ambition, the whole affair collapses. Remember that self-love is extraordinarily obstinate and unintelligent. It has a great deal to do with acquired conscience, tradition, culture, buffers, pictures, and so on. It is based upon keeping up appearances and being cool. All this has nothing to do with real conscience, from which springs real love. It is our imagination that plays such a tremendous part in the unhappiness of life, as the work teaches often. Here we can examine aim, in connection with acquired conscience. The danger is that we may follow an aim made by acquired conscience, where such an aim is of course erroneous. An aim cannot be formed from the dictates of our acquired conscience, which belongs to the acquired side of ourselves, to personality. Here we need to reflect upon what this means. A real aim in work on self has nothing to do with acquired conscience, which dictates to us all sorts of unreal aims. An aim may be right, but its basis can be wrong. Consider making an aim from acquired conscience, and then reflect upon what it might mean to make an aim from what the work teaches. We know the work takes the place of real conscience, until the latter is gradually awakened. If we constantly wish to cling to what we are, and if our only idea of right and wrong is derived from an acquired conscience, then we will often formulate the wrong aims, submitting ourselves to useless effort, and therefore loss of force. Acquired conscience may tell you that you ought to be more sociable, inquire after other people's health, echo their reactions, and so on. However, if you really try to do this as an aim, it will go terribly wrong, because it is not real but has as its basis a matter of reputation, of being thought well of, admired, emulated, and so on. Such an aim only tortures you because it leads into nothing real internally. You might have the same kind of aim, but from a much deeper level. You could, for example, be told by your better emotions that you must not be so difficult, or something along those lines. This comes through self-observation and through a much deeper realization of your situation. Simply to externally consider from false conscience has nothing to do with realizing the necessity of external considering from a deeper level. The reason why you do things is quite different when you act from acquired conscience, as opposed to acting from real conscience. When you do a thing from real conscience, from consciousness of yourself and what you are truly like, its action is to develop essence. You make, as it were, essence understand why certain things are necessary. But if you act from an acquired conscience for the sake of internal considering as to how you stand with other people, in order to make a better position for yourself, then it will not develop essence at all, because the neutralizing force is quite different. You will then do a thing for the sake of some form of merit, and not from insight into the good of what you are doing for its own sake. You might be meritorious, an excellent person, and yet inwardly you can be nothing but a sham, or practically so anyway. What we learn of good from the acquired side of ourselves, through education and impression, must be shifted from that outer basis and become a genuine, sincere thing that we wish to live by, not simply imitated. That which we desire to be and not simply pretend to be. In all this lies a great deal of very sincere self-observation, which takes a long time, and our only guide is the action of this work on us, what it teaches once it has begun to influence our lives. Remember that all of our concealed hatreds and contempts, which we do not manifest for fear of reputational loss, exist in the psychological world of ourselves, in the real world of ourselves, which means that we find ourselves in our own psychological world such as we have created it. And if we have had a great deal of hate, then we will find ourselves surrounded by nothing but hate, which is why we are often taught that we need to neutralize things in ourselves. One of the great methods of accomplishing this is to see the self for who and what it is, not continually apportioning blame to other people, circumstances, and events. This seeing of the truth about oneself leads to inner peace and causes essence to grow, so the next time we are different, and our lives in that cycle attract a different fate. However, the thing must be real, not done for the sake of outer merit, praise, or from some picture. Browning says in Paracelsus, "Truth lies within ourselves, it takes no rise." Where truth abides in fullness and around, wall upon wall, the gross flesh hems it in, this perfect, clear perception, which is truth. A baffling and perverting carnal mesh binds it and makes all error, and to know rather consists in opening out a way, whence the imprisoned splendor may escape, than in effecting entry for a light supposed to be without. It is correct to say that truth lies within ourselves. It is quite easy to say this. However, it takes long and difficult work to understand the reality of that truth in ourselves, because we are full of pseudo-truth and continually spend all our money, all of our life force, in maintaining the pseudo-truth about ourselves, which makes us all restless. Real truth makes people quiet and gives peace, whereas pseudo-truth makes everyone uncertain, worried, and tense. Acquired conscience is noisy, so to speak, whereas it is necessary to listen to real conscience. We solve many problems, as we suppose, through following acquired conscience in which we satisfy ourselves, and in a way justify the self. Though after a time we become tired of acting from this acquired conscience and wish to listen to something deeper. Many people find that they do not seek to get rid of the pain that they feel through some manifestation of an acquired conscience. In Isaiah it is said that God dwells in the high and holy place, with him also that is of a contrite and humble spirit. See Isaiah chapter 57 verse 15. Understand what it means to realize the significance of this phrase, "I am not like this," or "I am in this lie," or "I am in this invented person that has taken charge of my life all these years." If we can understand what that means, then we begin to understand what work on self is about. The objective of this work is to awaken real conscience, which is the same in everyone. In self-observation we can come to the point of saying, "I am not this I that is speaking, that is behaving like this. I am not this person that I have imagined myself to be. I am not in all of these external things, these honors, these positions, these pretenses, these virtues, these things that I try to do, these fictions that I keep up. No, I am not these things that have taken charge of my life. I am not these I's." Well, then we say, what am I? You cannot tell yet what you are, save by seeing what you are not, then getting gradually, by means of inner work, away from that great fiction that you have kept up all these years. Only you must do it with a certain amount of humor, with a certain capacity for real laughter at yourself. Then gradually more real things begin to cluster around that sense of yourself, And this may be shown by the fact that you suddenly find that you're able to think, able to read, able to reflect. The reason being that you are carried a little from the treadmill of everyday life. This excited life that you have been crowding into in order to gain happiness, which so few can surrender. For most people think that to give it up means death. On the contrary, it does not mean death but life. Recall the phrase in the work that no one is happy. But to what extent do we go to invent this happiness, and in that regard how do we follow our acquired conscience, thinking it will give us happiness, whereas it is exactly the thing that makes us wretched the entire time? It is a kind of juggernaut that crushes everything real in us, and to which we sacrifice our lives. We might think this a little solemn, not so, but like everything else in the work, it must be taken with a grain of salt. Our ordinary life eyes are not the eyes that will give us inner peace or stability, and that as the work teaches, we have to separate from those eyes belonging to false personality and this false conscience, in order to touch anything deeper and more genuine. When you can observe an eye in yourself that is always leading you astray, into false ambitions and false aims, into rivalry, into contempt for others, and when you can catch a glimpse of this eye having acted in you all of your life, an eye that you had to follow and obey, then it is a wonderful experience to be able to say to yourself, I am not that eye, and to begin to separate from it. If we had real conscience, the whole world would unite, and all police, judges, law, war, military control, local government and so on, would cease to be required, because real conscience, which is buried in all of us, is one and the same. If all people had real conscience, they would understand one another, and speak one common tongue, one common language. In this work, we try to study a terminology that will bring us together, that we can all understand, and its objective is to awaken real conscience. However, as long as we have artificial, acquired conscience, which is different in practically every case, according to upbringing, the nation, culture, religion and so on, there is no possibility of any common understanding, and so everything must always go on, just as it always has. Here are people getting into their traditional eyes and fighting with one another on every side, where no one is trying to understand anything, no one can understand anything, so the whole chaotic plot of life, which is due to us all being asleep, will continue, just as before, or even worse than before. Humanity must try to form a nucleus of people that wish to work on themselves, on acquired conscience, on false personality, and to separate from this terrible factory of creation, then meet each other on a deeper level, where it is possible to meet others without all the insults, confusion and misunderstanding of ordinary life, led by sleeping people who take themselves for granted and in every department of life, behaving purely mechanically. Every person has in them, as the work teaches, a common basis of a mutual understanding which has been overlaid layer by layer through acquired conscience, and a powerful outer skin of false personality, with which everyone identifies most of all. The objective of this work is to break through that false pseudo-layer that causes so much damage to ourselves, and to everyone else. We know that it is difficult to respect a person with no mind of their own, someone who is simply composed of acquired opinions, buffers, traditional attitudes and prejudices borrowed from the society they find themselves in. With such a person there is nothing but acquired conscience, which may be better or worse, useful for life or otherwise, but there is nothing really individual in them. If we converse with such a person, there is no thought, no original ideas, nothing alive, no power of anything new. In fact, we know beforehand exactly what playback will run to any particular stimulus applied, and how the same opinions will be regurgitated over and over again without change. Acquired or false conscience is in this way a rigid, fixated thing, a mechanical action, whereas real conscience is quite different. It sees everything in its true light, and so judges matters differently in every case. It is relative and not absolute.